Let's start with a prayer. Oh. O Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, who abides everywhere and fills all things, treasury of good things, giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us from all impurity, and save our souls, O good one. Amen. All right. So if you're on Zoom, just unmute yourself. I ask if you to keep yourself mute, unless you have a question, and then of course unmute and ask me. And feel free to interject at any time. For those who are here, I would prefer if you could actually use the mic when you ask a question, because then it's audible to everybody. So if you can do that, that'd be super. So today we're doing today and the next 3 Mondays. We're doing, actually, that's not entirely true. I think it's this Monday, next Monday, then there's a Monday off because it's actually Vespers for Annunciation on the other side of town. So we won't have it that Monday. And then there's 2 more Mondays. So anyway, and the theme, of course, is kind of Great Lent and its content. So today, let's see. There we go. So kind of what are we hoping to cover? What is Great Lent and why Great Lent? Why do we want or need or have Great Lent? The ingredients of Great Lent, sort of the things that comprise Great Lent. What I like to call the curriculum of Great Lent. And of course, a curriculum is sort of a course of study that kind of with the intention of giving you a certain minimum competency in an area, right? And I would suggest that the church as a whole has a curriculum, and I think, most of it is probably liturgical, but I would say that curriculum is sort of intensified for the 7 weeks that make up Great Lent. So we'll talk about that down the road. Things that are unique, the prayers, the services that are unique. There's like 4 things, particular like prayer services or parts of prayer services that are unique to Lent and are only done during Great Lent, or are there at least only prescribed during Great Lent? And then we'll talk a little bit about Holy Week as well. So that's the goal. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to just dive in and interrupt. So this is a quote from the prologue from Ohrid, and the icon is the person who sort of compiled the prologue, St. Nikolai Velimirovich. And to me, this is like a great sort of like beginning, like there's a book that once said you have to begin with the end in mind, right? So this quote, I think, is sort of our beginning with the end in mind. What is the goal? So this is what we hear. It says in the prologue, the more a man or a woman advances in spiritual knowledge and in purification of the heart, the more it appears to him that the depth in which he finds himself is even lower, and that the height to which he strives is even higher. So the more we mature spiritually, the more we, rather than thinking we're closer to God, we actually have this perception that sort of the chasm between us and God is really growing. When one spiritual giant on his deathbed heard that his companions were praising him because of his great asceticism, he began to weep and said, "My children, I have not even begun my spiritual life," right? So there's really, I think, the church would say that, there's very much a sense that the more we grow spiritually, the more we really become, you sort of on a superficial level, one might think that as one matures spiritually, one would be like, hey, I'm more patient, or hey, I'm humbler, or whatever, right? But I think that what the saints find is the opposite, is that the more genuinely humble we become, and we may in fact be more humble, what we realize is that, well, maybe let me phrase that actually. I think what we realize is that, and actually, that's not in here, but that's an interesting thought. So I may be wrong on this, so I'm just going to float this out there. But maybe what it is that the more we grow spiritually, the less we are saying, I am more humble than Jason. What we are saying is, I become more aware of the humility of God, right? So I think maybe the more we grow spiritually, the more our point of comparison changes from our neighbor, which it should never be in the first place, but it often is, to God, right? So invariably, if I stop comparing myself with Janet, right, and I start comparing myself with God, I'm only going to lose in that comparison. So I don't know. That's a thought I have, but that's really what the spiritual life is about, and I would say that is obviously sort of put on steroids during Great Lent, sort of that goal, that striving. Um, so the logistics, this is a really quick overview of Great Lent. So technically, Great Lent is 6 weeks long. It starts on Clean Monday, which is literally the first day of Lent. Clean Monday for us is like Ash Wednesday for the Catholics. It's the kickoff day. So from Clean Monday until the day before the Saturday of Lazarus. Now, for those who don't know, the Saturday of Lazarus is basically 8 days before Easter, right? So there's this 6-week stretch that makes up Great Lent, from Clean Monday to Saturday of Lazarus. And then there's also sort of these really like 3 weeks and 1 day, basically. So really 4 Sundays that precede the start of Lent, precede Clean Monday. And they each really have a theme. Really, there's not a whole lot during the weekdays of these weeks, but the Sundays are very, they're very specific. They have a very important, like the first Sunday is the publican and the Pharisee, which is obviously I think the last line in that gospel is, he who humbles himself will be exalted, and he who exalts himself will be humbled. So that's kind of the moral to the story. The prodigal son is sort of this idea of repentance, but I would argue as much, it's the idea that God is waiting for us, right? God's love and God's open arms, sort of always waiting for us to come back. Then the one after that is the last judgment. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was naked and you clothed me. Right. So this idea that we need to, we need to bear fruit in our faith. We can't just be like faithful but do nothing. And then the day literally before the first day of Lent is called Forgiveness Sunday, and that's it's also there's 2 themes that Sunday. One is forgiveness, so sort of being reconciled to the people around us. And then the other one is actually the expulsion of Adam and Eve from Eden. So that's also commemorated that day. And then Great Lent does not include Holy Week, right? So really the whole span from like the opening shot of the publican and the Pharisee until Easter Day is really like 10 weeks. Exactly. Yeah, it's 10 weeks. So it's a long stretch, right? The Orthodox we don't just prepare, we like to prepare for our preparation. That's how we do it. We're big into that. And then this whole period is known as the Triodion. So this 10-week span is literally, there's a book called the Triodion, which literally means the book of 3 odes. So that's the way that the services are organized. So that we call this period the period of the Triodion, basically. So that's kind of shorthand. And this whole season ends at midnight on Holy Saturday. So basically, that Triodion book is first picked up and put on the chant stand the Sunday of the publican and Pharisee, and then literally at midnight on Easter night, really before, Saturday before, it's taken and it's put back on the shelf, and there's a different book that we take out called the Pentecostadion. So a few thoughts, just sort of kind of high elevation thoughts maybe on Lent. So Lent, sometimes the fathers will say that Lent is the tithe of the year, right? So basically a tithe that literally means 1/10. And it sort of harkens back to the Old Testament where Abraham and then later Jacob, and then later it was sort of institutionalized in the Jewish religion. People would give, 10% of their, 1 out of every 10 sheep or 1 out of every 10 bushels of hay or whatever. They would offer it to God. And so sometimes the fathers of the church and other writers say that Lent is sort of like our tithe of the year, right? So, if you do the math, there's 365 days in the year. Lent, technically, although this doesn't include Holy Week and the 4 weeks, 3 weeks leading up. Lent technically is 40 days, right? So it's a little more, right? But it's always better to give a little more than a little less, right? So we give 40 days, even though 36 days would be more precise. And this is a passage in the Old Testament from talking about tithing, but I won't read it because it's not necessary. It's also a time, I mean, arguably, I would say it's a time for us to return to normalcy, right? Which is not to be confused with sort of the kind of institutionalized insanity of our own day and age, right? So during Lent, seek God and His will. Simplify your life, right? So, I'll tell you my own life, like, and I wish we would do it more, but the first week of Lent, the whole of the first week of Lent, well, this week there was, so the whole of the first week of Lent and Holy Week, so the end and the beginning, we don't do any TV. TV just gets unplugged. So it's just a way to kind of, and it's really, I got to tell you, I always find that when we do that, it's just, everyone's like calmer and it's just peaceful. And we'll play a board game or something, right? But it's really nice. You think that like all these gadgets are like adding value to your life, but then when you sort of fast from them, you realize they really aren't adding value. So let me keep reading. Simplify your life. Cut back on entertainment. Don't just give up things. Take on good things. Try to concentrate on what's most important, God and your neighbor. Come to worship more often if you can, right? So during Lent, last week, we literally had, I think starting on Saturday, today's Monday. So like 10 days ago, that Saturday, we had a service every single day. We had 2 Saturdays ago. Then we had it on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sunday, we actually had 2 because there was a Pan-Orthodox service. And then today. So there've been like 11 straight days, right? So there's no dearth of services to attend, right? So, maybe we can make excuses, but they are there. They're there to be had. Come to worship more often if you can. Most parishes offer the Wednesday night liturgy of the pre-sanctified gifts, which we do along with every Monday I do a service, and then Friday nights we also do services. Any questions, comments? Anyone? All right. It is said that astronauts, after spending a prolonged time in space, have lingering effects of zero gravity. You've probably heard this. Our bodies are made for gravity and require its constant pull for everything from muscle tone to bone density. But we now live in situations in which many forms of natural gravity have been reduced or removed. What effect does the long-term ability to have almost any food at any time of the year have on the human body? He's kind of saying, like, that's a good question. As someone who has spent the better part of my life at a desk, I can attest to the effect of a sedentary existence. My lower back, my range of motion, the flexibility of my joints, and all consistent with the modern white-collar worker, or are all consistent, right? So basically what he's saying is that, part of Lent is simply to sort of change our MO. Right, just to change and even on some level, nowadays you can really get almost any food, but like even just cooking, I don't know, we cook a fair amount at home, but just making your food. That alone. I don't know about you guys, but when I make food, it just is much more meaningful. It just has there's something to it, right? There's love, right, that's in it, right? So the goal really is to sort of shift kind of our way of living for a time, right? Just for a little stretch. What effect do such things have? He's talking about gravity still. What effect do such things have on the soul? For the soul requires gravity as well. Plato stated in his Republic that all children should learn to play a musical instrument because music was required for the right development of the soul. Interesting. We give far too little thought to such things, assuming that no matter what environment we live in, our inherent freedom of choice remains unscathed and we can always decide to do something different or be something different. Now, a little side note. It was interesting because the other day I was reading an article. I don't know if you've heard of the magazine called The Atlantic. It's I don't even know what political spin it has. What? Is it? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. But there was an article in there about sort of the decline of social interaction. In fact, it was funny because the first section was entitled something like, I think it said, "The bar is closed." And basically what the author said is he had apparently had gone to some Mexican restaurant where there was a bar in the restaurant, and the bar was kind of, kind of a lively place. People would go. And when he went in this time, he saw a sign on the bar that said, "The bar is closed." And he saw like a bunch of takeout packs, right? All these like to-go orders, right? People are coming in and getting their food and leaving, right? And what does that say? Of course, it says that we're not hanging out at the bar anymore, right? So, there was a point I was going to say on that. Hold on. Oh, one of the things he says in the article is he talks about the Amish. And he says, and I don't know if this is true or not, but what he says is that, the Amish are sort of famous for sort of being kind of Luddites. They don't adopt technology very well or at all. And what he said is, he really said that it's not really an issue of them rejecting all technology. What they do is they look at the technology and they say, does this help the culture we want to create within our community? And he gave the example of like I think like cell phones. And I think I don't know if he talked to somebody, but basically what he said is, he said, the Amish have this practice of just going and visiting neighbors. They'll just go out and visit, right? Which is nice. People used to do that. And they said, we felt that having phones would get in the way of us doing that, because that's important for our culture, right? So I think we don't think, we just sort of adopt and think if it's new, it's got to be good. But that's not always the case, needless to say. I could decide to run a marathon tomorrow, but I know that the first quarter mile would leave me gasping for breath and exhausted. You cannot go from 40 years of a desk to the demands of a marathon just because you choose to do so. And so we come to Great Lent. All right. So the point is that, the point of Lent is kind of, to use the marathon metaphor, is to sort of get us into a shape where we can actually do something rather than just be kind of sitting at our desks, decaying, or whatever you want to say. There's a little humor. So once we wean them off their obsession with looking at their phones, we'll release them back into the wild. All right. So no laughs? Come on. I saw a smile from Todd. That's as much as I got. So it's a time for us to relearn self-control in our lives, right? So that's a big part. Clearly, fasting. I honestly, personally don't think fasting is primarily about self-control. We'll talk about that more in a few slides. But certainly it's part of that, right? So part of, I think one of the most important things we can have, or if we don't have it, it can be really bad, is the ability to say no. Right. And so when we go somewhere, when our kids go to McDonald's and everyone's getting, bacon double cheeseburger, and they say, you know what, I'm just going to have a fries. Right. That's a good thing. Right. So part of this Lenten season is to sort of exercise that muscle of saying no, of sort of controlling ourselves and not really giving in to every urge. So the purpose of fasting is to teach us, and again, I think this is only part of it, and I actually think this is the less important part, is to teach us to keep a discipline so that when we need to give up something important, your neighbor's wife, robbing banks, you'll be in practice. Fasting is like practicing for athletes to prepare them for the real game, right? And then this is a little joke, but I think it's true. I think fasting is sort of like a spiritual decompression chamber, right? So what is a decompression chamber? Primarily, a decompression chamber is used when people are scuba diving and they go really deep, but they come up too fast, and then the oxygen in their blood actually it becomes air, where I guess it's supposed to be dissolved in their blood, or it sort of becomes more large or whatever, right? And so this sort of impersonates coming up more slowly, and it allows for that air that otherwise could kill them to sort of redissolve into their blood, right? And I think for us, we need, sometimes I even refer to like the narthex of the church as sort of the decompression area, because, obviously we need more time than just the brief amount of time we are in the narthex. But, we can't just jump right in. We need to make our way in kind of slowly. So what are the tools of Great Lent? And there's lots, but a few that I've pointed out here are obviously fasting. We all know about fasting. Prayer, which I would define as sort of personal prayer, and worship, which I would define more as like corporate worship within the church. Spiritual reading, self-reflection and repentance, and almsgiving. So these are some of the tools which we'll talk about as we go ahead to in the next few weeks. So tool number one, fasting. I'm just going to kind of go through these a little bit. First of all, I mean, you guys probably mostly know this, but what are these quote unquote rules of fasting? Typically, well, so I'm really just talking about Lent now. So I'm really just talking about the 7 weeks that comprise Lent and Holy Week. So on the weekdays of Lent, we refrain, and again, not everybody does this. Some people do a lighter version. Some people have someone's pregnant or nursing or has health issues or something. We modify things. But the sort of the normative prescription would be to abstain from meat and meat products, which is anything, I always say, anything that comes from an animal without killing it. We would also abstain from fish, milk products, cheese, and also wine and oil. And actually, I don't know how many of you know this, but the reason wine and oil, I'm going to get to that, so I'll come back to that. And I'll cover what I was going to say in a minute. So what is allowed is seafood, but not fish. So if it has a backbone, it's basically not eaten, but one can have shrimp, calamari. And I think my guess is that when these rules were made, that was probably the equivalent of like Spam, right? It wasn't a big deal. So, I think a lot of these things are cultural. I'll say the wine and oil. Does anyone know why we abstain from wine and oil? Okay, what about wine? Okay. All right. No, that was what I was going to say. What about wine? Actually, it's the same thing. Because even Christ says in the gospel, right? He says, you don't put old wine into new skins, right? He says that, right? So the practice back in the day, obviously this isn't done anymore, was to keep oil and wine in the intestines of an animal or something. So there was a sense that it was sort of, polluted because it was touching animal products. Although I also think, as Renee said, clearly oil is an extremely heavy, of all the macronutrients, right? I think carbs have like 4 calories per whatever. I think protein has 4 calories, but oil has like 9. So oil is clearly a more substantive thing. And obviously wine has other, influences, other impacts on us. So that's that. That's just weekdays. On weekends, it's a slightly lighter fast. Wine and oil are permitted. Of course, that doesn't matter if you're not abstaining from wine and oil, but that's the rule. And then there's actually 2 Sundays where fish is allowed, which is in the Orthodox world, fish is like a gigantic concept. Like when you get to like March 25th or Palm Sunday, you're loving. It's like the best fish you've ever had. So on Annunciation, which is 2 weeks from Tuesday, and Palm Sunday, which is, of course, the Sunday before Easter, fish and wine and oil. Whenever fish is allowed, wine and oil is always allowed as well. Is that lit up?
Yes.
Good, okay.
Okay, so I have a question with oil. How about lard? Is that allowed?
Well, lard would be an animal product, so of course. Yeah, no, it's not allowed. I'm sorry. Yeah, lard comes from, presumably it comes from beef, I'm guessing typically. Right? Yeah. So no. Because that would be an animal product. Yeah. You want to take that? Yeah. Yeah.
To what extent do you, like, let's say the word, I heard a priest say, oh, you don't have to go look at the ingredients. Let's say like popcorn.
Yeah.
Like this 100-calorie popcorn. If you read the ingredients, it says corn oil, whatever. Are we to go to that extent? I mean, it's all.
Yeah, no, I get it.
But that's one question. And then the other question is, the oil, does it include like, I guess it does, like coconut oil?
So, I mean, here's the problem. That's a good, yeah. So the first question was like, how fastidious are we supposed to be? Um, I am not super fastidious with packaged goods, but I don't eat a lot of like packaged foods. I just don't. I mean, like I can't remember the last time I had like a, burrito from Trader Joe's or something. I just don't eat that stuff. When I cook, honestly, even outside of the fast, when I cook, I actually typically don't use oil. So like if I make a lentil soup, I don't use oil. I just saute it in the pan. I don't even saute it. I just throw it all in there, close the lid and let it cook. I'm far too lazy. Yeah, I mean that I wouldn't. Yeah, I mean I'm not super fastidious about it. I would say with my own cooking, I would probably abstain from oil. Um, and I mean, I mean, I wouldn't get like sourdough smeared in olive oil bread or something, you know what I'm saying? But if there's a smidge of canola oil, it's like the 15th thing on the menu or the ingredient list. I don't know that it's a big deal. And then the second question. So really, I mean, when these practices of fasting were developed, there really was only olive oil. There weren't canolas. I don't even know what a canola is. What is a canola? I don't know what a canola. Like, how does one get canola? I'm honestly curious. Anyone know?
It's from corn, actually, corn.
Is it from corn? Okay. But so I mean, I think there's two schools of thought. One is that it's just olive oil, and one is that it's all oils. Um, yeah, I mean, as I said, I really don't like the only time I really give a lot of thought to oil, and I don't really give a lot of thought, but is when I'm cooking. So when I make my fasolada or my lentil soup or my tofu, stir-fried tofu with whatever, I usually won't use oil. But when I've had a bad day and I go get a package of Oreo cookies, I don't pay attention to the oil on the menu, on the recipe. How's that for an answer? Um, there you go. So does that answer both of your questions? Okay. Actually, I don't get Oreo cookies. I get Nutter Butters. Nutter Butters are way better than Oreo cookies. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's doable. Oh, yeah. Is it because of cooking or because of like when you like get packaged foods at like the grocery store? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you have to, I think if you really want to do it, you almost have to cook everything yourself. Yeah.
For example, like the other day I was at work and I grabbed like a bag of chips. Oh, that's my snack. Oh, shoot, I can't have it. I can't even,
Yeah,
because there's oil in it.
sure.
That's why I was, and it's all relative. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, what you don't want to do is you don't want to be sort of, I guess it really, in some sense, yeah, it's kind of an issue of your heart, right? And context. I mean, maybe if I go visit someone and they put out food, what am I going to do? I don't know, right? So there's all these different kind of challenges. Any other questions? All right, let's keep going. Um, so that continuing, so Holy Week, no, so now this is a very strict, this is really more of a monastic practice, is to not eat anything from Holy Thursday through after the Paschal liturgy. Now that's really, again, that's done more in monasteries. But yeah, it's not usually done by people living in the world. Holy Thursday, because it's a celebratory day, it's even if you come, like one thing you'll notice in Lenten worship is typically the lights are dimmed. Typically the priest is wearing like purple or black. I don't have black, I have purple, so I wear purple. The altar, which as it is right now, is covered in like purple coverings. And on the weekends, that changes. Then on the weekend, it becomes either white or gold or silver or bright, some kind of festive color. So Thursday, Holy Thursday, is really actually a festive day because it is the day on which the Last Supper was initiated. That's the day we commemorate Christ being in the upper room. Take, eat, this is my body, drink of it, all of you, this is my blood. So that event sort of makes that day more festive. And by extension, it kind of reduces the intensity of the fast. Just that day, you can have oil and wine. So, Francis, do you have a question? Yeah, so I mean, the liturgy is in the morning. That's a good question. It's a vesperal liturgy. Um, the Holy Week is kind of weird because we do everything sort of like 12 hours. It's really strange. I've never really heard a good explanation. Well, I've heard one. So everything is, whereas like now, like today, if I were to do a Vesper service, which is the evening prayer service, I would do it in the evening. But as soon as on Palm Sunday night, for some reason, everything gets moved up 12 hours. So the morning service that properly would be Holy Monday morning, is actually done Holy Sunday night. And then everything gets moved back. So like, for example, on Holy Thursday, we're really doing the morning prayer service, what's called the Matins or the Orthro service. We're doing it Wednesday night. And the Vespers that properly would be on Thursday night, we're doing on Thursday morning. The only thing I've heard is that the morning services, which are done in the evening, are sort of more like theologically robust. And so the church decided, in order for more people to be able to attend those services, to do this 12-hour shift. It's the only time we do it. The other 51 weeks of the year, everything's normal. It's just this 1 week where we move everything. It's peculiar. But Thursday is really the day. I mean, Holy Thursday is technically the day on which that is commemorated. So, was there another question? Yeah.
I do. So when Jesus was in the desert doing the fasting for 40 days, I thought it was like completely no food. Do you think that's what he was doing, or?
Yeah, that's kind of what I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not clear, it just says, but it says that he
got very hungry.
He was very hungry. Yeah. So I don't know. But that's kind of what I've always assumed.
Is that done by monks at all? Like,
I don't know. I mean, like I've heard of like St. John Maximovich doing it maybe, but these are people that are very, super holy man. I don't even know if he did it. I think he would do like a week or something, or maybe he'd do like, the first 3 days is more common. Yeah, there is a practice. So starting on the first 3 days of Lent. So there's a practice to not eat anything on those days and break the fast Wednesday night after the pre-sanctified liturgy. But again, not a lot of people do that. I mean, I probably wouldn't even encourage people to do that just because let's keep going. So wine and oil are permitted on Holy Thursday. On Holy Friday is a strict fast. And like liturgy isn't done. Really, it even says here, all are urged to eat little or nothing, at least until 3 p.m., which was the hour when we commemorate the Lord's dying on the cross. And then there's no fasting at all the week after Pascha. So normally, right, we fast on Wednesdays and Fridays, but the week after Pascha is called Bright Week. And so we get sort of this dispensation for the whole week. There's no fasting. We can eat whatever we want, and we're for that whole week. So let me see here. All right. So don't do this. What are you not supposed to do? As with all the spiritual tools / disciplines, we should do them with the counsel from a spiritual guide, i.e. either a spiritual father or spiritual mother. It is very dangerous to be our own spiritual guide, right? So we shouldn't like read, and this is something I would have done like 20 years ago as a stupid seminarian. No, we shouldn't read the life of St. John of Kronstadt and be like, I'm going to be like St. John of Kronstadt. No. I'm never going to be like St. John of Kronstadt. So no point even trying, right? So we should always have someone with us guiding us so we don't do foolish things. Now we talked about how part of fasting was to teach us self-discipline, right? To learn how to say no. And I think that's the second most important reason for fasting. I think the most important reason is, the summary of this slide is that fasting teaches us obedience, right? So Adam and Eve, right? So what we're told, if you look at the Old Testament, particularly Genesis 2 and Genesis 9, what you see is that in the Garden of Eden, well, it's kind of hard to tell, but it seems that in the Garden of Eden, there were some constraints. It seems that there really wasn't any eating of any animal stuff until after the flood. I'm going to go in reverse. So I'm going to read the bottom quote first. This is Noah, right? So It says, so this is after the flood, after Noah, gets out, he builds an altar and all that. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth. So presumably that wasn't the case prior. Presumably the animals weren't afraid of humans. On every bird of the air, on all that move on the earth, and all the fish in the sea. They are given it into your hand. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. Right? So I think, and I'm not sure if I've even read this, but I think I've heard this, is that prior to the flood, there wasn't this sort of fear, between the animals and humans. And also animals weren't eaten, nor were the products of animals eaten, right? And so I would suggest that fasting, well, actually, I guess there's 2 points here. One point is that the point of fasting is to sort of return us to sort of the state of the Garden of Eden in terms of what and how we eat. But I also think, and now I'll read the first quote. So then this is where Adam and Eve sort of this is where God gives them their first rule to follow. Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the, it's interesting, because it doesn't say the animals either here, right? He could have. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for on the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Right? So really, in some sense, I think it's true. The reason for the fall, the reason Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden was because they broke a fast, right? God said, don't eat this food, that's fasting. They ate it and they lost paradise, right? And so I really feel that for me, I think one of the strongest arguments for fasting is that it teaches us to be obedient to something other than ourselves, right? In this case, to the church, right? So when we fast, basically what we're saying is that the church has this practice. We acknowledge somehow, on some level, we're acknowledging it as a valid practice, or we wouldn't do it, right? And we are being obedient to it, right? So I think fasting, I think a lot of the value of fasting is to teach us obedience to something other than what Father Panteleimon wants right now. Yeah, any comments? Tool number 2, prayer. So we just finished tool number 1, and now we're moving on to tool number 2. This is a quote from St. Basil. So this is how you pray continually, not by offering prayer in words, but by joining yourself to God through your whole way of life, right? That sounds a lot like Lent. So that your life becomes one continuous and uninterrupted prayer, right? So really, I think part of Lent is to sort of, it's like a treadmill. And you know how like you get on a treadmill and like you can be walking on the treadmill and you can be walking. Well, Lent is like taking the treadmill and like turning up the speed like 5 miles an hour. Right? So all of a sudden you're going at it, right? The point is for us to, at least for a brief period of time, to sort of ratchet up our spiritual struggles. That's what I would say. Right. And I think that's kind of what St. Basil is saying. And the goal really is for this. Ideally, maybe one way of looking at it is, ideally it would be like, and this is kind of how I think of it, at least in my own head, is like I'm here spiritually, right? So I'm kind of chugging along here, right? And then Lent comes, and Lent kind of puts me up a little bit, like it jumps me up because I'm praying more and I'm fasting more, I'm reading a little more, right? And then Lent ends, and I go down, but not as far down as I was before, right? And then I chug along at that level, hopefully, and I don't go down, right? Hopefully. And then Lent comes again next year, right? And it pushes me up. So, right, the goal really of Lent is sort of to kind of slowly kind of help us climb the mountain, as it were, of the spiritual life, I would say. So Lenten worship is different from non-Lenten worship, all right? So these are various ways in which it's different. The colors are purple, so everything is all the colors, the vestments, the altar table. The pace is slower, right? We tend to, the kind of the speed of Lenten services is a little bit more mellow. It's a little slower. The church is darker. We dim the lights. Services are longer and seemingly sort of more monotonous, I think. There is a greater physicality to our worship, right? So there's more fasting, there's more prostrations, there's more standing, right? So there's this whole sort of physical dimension, right? Because we believe that, we don't believe that we're like just, spirits or that we're just bodies, right? We're both, right? Together. And so, our body helps our soul and our soul helps our body. Right? Sometimes, and sometimes, sometimes it can be that I may not want to pray, and then I stand up and I, do my cross, or maybe I do a prostration, and all of a sudden things come to life, right? So the body helps the soul, and the soul helps the body. So now we're going to go through just some of the services that are sort of unique to Great Lent. The one we just did earlier this evening is known as the Great Compline service. And a lot of these services, just to make a distinction, most of the services are, most Orthodox Christians are primarily, and probably in some cases exclusively, familiar with Sunday liturgy. Right. So what is Sunday liturgy? Sunday liturgy, the main point, the high point of Sunday liturgy is the reception of Holy Communion, right? But the majority of the services that exist within the Orthodox Church don't have Holy Communion. They're literally just corporate opportunities to come together and worship. So Great Compline is that way. The Akathist hymn is that way. Small Compline is that way. The Paraclesi service. These are all just services where we come and we pray. So most people don't even, there's probably a lot of people out there that don't realize that there's this abundance of worship services in the Orthodox Church that don't have Holy Communion at all, right? So this is just I say that just by way of, framing things. So the Greek word for compline is apodipnon, which literally means after dinner. So basically in a monastery, you would do this service. They have dinner, then they all process to the church, and they do the Great Compline service. There are many prescribed intervals of prayer during the day. One of them is prayer before sleeping. So really, there's really two Compline services. There's the Great Compline service, which is only done during Lent. And it takes about an hour. It's a lot of reading, a lot of psalms, some chanting, and then there's also what's known as the Small Compline. And the Small Compline takes 15 or 20 minutes. And that's something that's done outside of Great Lent. So on the weekdays of Great Lent, we would pray. We don't do this, but like if my family and I were like super disciplined about being obedient to the rubrics of the worship, every night we would do every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every Sunday night. No, I think it's a Sunday night. Does it sound Sunday night? Yeah. Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, we would do Great Compline. Friday night and Saturday night, we would do Small Compline. So it's just during the weekdays. Basically, when the colors are purple, we do Great Compline. When they switch to the white and the gold, then we do Small Compline. And again, these are just really just prayer services. A lot of people do like Small Compline. It's very common for people to do Small Compline at home. That's what we do at night in our house. We'll just all gather around the altar, our icons, and we say the Small Compline as a family. Yeah. Small Compline during Lent is done on Friday night. Well, actually, the Small Compline is done at Akathist hymn. Yeah, that's what we do. So it's done on Friday night, and because Friday night is really Saturday, right? Because everything flips over. So Friday night and Saturday night we do Small Compline, and then the other nights. Now outside of Lent, we always do Small Compline every day. We can do it every day of the week. We wouldn't do Great Compline because Great Compline is only done during Lent. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So it's prescribed to do that for the person when you come to church. Like let's say today we did the Great.
Yeah.
what happens to the, so is that included as my personal prayer? Because I know they said in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think I understand your question. Like, I can tell you tonight, when I get home, I'm actually just going to do the prayer of Saint Ephrem with my kids in front of our icons. I will not do the great compline or the small compline because I just did it. Is that what you're asking? Okay, yeah. And even to be honest, even on Friday night, when we do the Akathist hymn with the small compline, when I get home, I don't do the small compline because I already did it. Yeah, so I try to be attentive too, because I know that this is it. If I'm not paying attention, then I don't get my prayers in for the evening. So you got to be extra attentive. Yeah.
I've been curious lately if like nobody came to the service, like even in Sunday. What does the priest do? You're still supposed to do them, right?
So, I mean, there needs to be at least two people at a liturgy. So I cannot do liturgy all by myself. That is not allowed. Now, I wouldn't do liturgy without a chanter because I need a chanter. So there would already be another person there. I mean, if I got here and my chanter, as soon as I got here, I got a text from my chanter saying, I have 103 fever, I'm not coming. Then, and actually that's probably, I mean, I've been a priest 19 years. That's probably happened once or twice. Then I wouldn't do liturgy. Now on Sunday, that would be very odd. I mean, I have other people that come and can chant and help, but on a weekday, that might be more common. I've had that. I don't think I've ever had that on a Sunday. The only time I didn't have liturgy on a Sunday was when we had COVID. Anyway, any other questions? All right. Let me keep going. So the Great Compline is a service reserved for the period of Great and Holy Lent. It is traditionally prayed in the evening, which is after dinner, as we said. In most parishes, if it is done, it is celebrated on Monday, Tuesday, and or Thursday, although it could be done on Wednesday because we don't do it on Wednesday in a parish because we have pre-sanctified liturgy, which is the next thing it says. Also on Friday of Great and Holy Lent, we celebrate the service of the Akathist or the Salutation of the Virgin Mary. So those are just side notes. We're going to talk about those more in a minute anyway. Any questions, comments? So that's really the Great Compline. Oh, and there's another slide. The Great Compline divine service lasts approximately an hour, so it takes about an hour. The curtain of the royal doors, located in the center of the icon screen where I'm pointing, leading into the holy altar, is generally closed during the service. I usually leave it open because that's just kind of the modern practice. Until the end, obscuring the altar from view. There is very little movement in this service by the priest, although there is a censing, and there are no gospel readings except for the first week of Lent. The divine service of Great Compline consists of about a dozen Old Testament psalm readings, several prayers, and several hymns. So if you come, I would encourage you to come. We pretty much every Monday night from 6 to 7, we do the Great Compline. As I said earlier, the only time we're not doing that is 2 weeks from today because it's the Feast of the Annunciation, and we're all going to be at the Frank Lloyd Wright Church up that way. So, but come. If you can come, then you can see what it is. The prayer of Saint Ephrem. How many of you are familiar with the prayer of Saint Ephrem the Syrian? All right. So this is really a unique prayer to Lent. It's, I mean, any of these prayers theoretically we could do outside of Lent, but these are typically prescribed just for Lent. And the prayer of Saint Ephrem is an example. So prayer of Saint Ephrem is kind of interesting. So it's attributed to Saint Ephrem the Syrian, who was tradition says that he was actually tradition actually says that he knew St. Basil and he was ordained a deacon by St. Basil. That's tradition. And it's a prayer that we say it in various services. So we said it actually at the Great Compline. It's something it's a good prayer to say. It's also kind of unique in that it is a prayer that involves doing prostrations, right? So, which is a full bow kind of with our head to the ground, right? So when we say the prayer, I mean, I'll read the prayer and I'll do the prayer. So normally we would face our icons if we have them. We bless ourselves. We'd say, "O Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of sloth, despair, lust of power, and idle talk." And then we would do a full prostration all the way to the ground. And then we come up and do the next sort of line. But give rather the spirit of chastity, humility, patience, and love to your servant. And then we would bless ourselves and do another prostration to the ground. Yes, Lord and King, grant me to see my own transgressions or failings and not to judge my brother, for you are blessed unto the ages of ages. Amen. And then you would do another full prostration with your head to the ground. So, any questions or comments on this? Yeah. Oh, yeah, the microphone.
Just want to comment on the video that you asked us to listen to.
The the thing I emailed through Realm. Yeah, I emailed some really good talks through them. I encourage you to listen to them. Yeah,
It goes,
correct. Yeah, he's a super gifted speaker. Did any of you listen to the talk?
do.
You did not? Okay, no, it's really, so if you go on Realm, if you have Realm, I uploaded some links to a talk. It's basically 2 hour and 15-minute talks by this monk from Mount Athos on the prayer, just literally talking, explaining the prayer. And it's really good. He's an excellent speaker.
As we get out of the food.
Yeah.
Because we are sinful and you go down and you touch the floor.
Sure.
Come back up.
So it's sort of a psychosomatic prayer, right? Where when we go down, we're kind of recognizing our own fallenness, our own brokenness. And then he says, even, and I was thinking about this the other day, he says, even when we're going down, we're sort of anticipating the going up again, right? And we know that God is merciful, right? So when we go up, we sort of are acknowledging the hope in God's mercy and forgiveness and his love for us, right? So there's a whole level of dynamics. And he talks about, so I mean, each of these things, right? So, I mean, laziness is the first thing that's listed. Actually, let me turn the slide over because I think I have more. So why does this short and simple prayer occupy such an important position in the entire Lenten worship? Because it enumerates in a unique way all the negative and positive elements of repentance and constitutes, so to speak, a checklist for our individual Lenten effort, right? So when we say this prayer, I mean, in my house, I'll say it with my morning prayers. And again, like the Great Compline, this actually is not said on the weekends, right? So it's only said Sunday. You would start saying it Sunday night, and then you would say it Friday morning. But then Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday morning, you wouldn't say it. Because again, it's sort of, the weekend is more celebratory, and this prayer is a little bit more solemn. So this is only done during the weekdays when things are a little more solemn. What was I going to say with that? But yeah, like in my house, typically I say it in the morning and the evening with my own prayers during Lent. And then in the morning, I try to remember to say it also with my wife and whatever kids are home. So it's a good practice to have, and it's a beautiful prayer. I mean, because it really, if you do it slowly and you really think, all right, you're like, all right, Lord, do not give to me sloth. Just pause for a second, right? Laziness, right? That's what that is, right? Don't give me this laziness, Lord. Don't give me despair. Actually, there's different translations. So sloth. Another translation, actually, the translation I use doesn't use the word despair. It uses vain curiosity, right? So basically being a busybody. Meddling is the same as vain curiosity. Despair, I think, has a distinctly different meaning than vain curiosity or meddling. Vain curiosity and meddling are really the same thing, kind of. Being a busybody. I mean, you could say that. But it's great because it just makes you think, all right, Lord, don't give me laziness. Don't make me a busybody. I don't need to know everything that's going on with everybody all the time, right? Lust for power, right? Don't make me lust for power, right? That was the devil. That was the reason the devil was expelled from paradise, right? Because he wanted power. He wanted to be God, right? And idle talk, right? Just na, 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 right? We talk too much, right? So help me, Lord, to close my mouth, right? And give rather the spirit of chastity. And when we think of chastity, we generally think of like sexual purity, and that's part of it. But I think part of it too is just sort of not looking at everything, just kind of keeping sort of the eye of our soul kind of focused and not scattered, right? Humility, right? What does humility mean? Humility, do you know what the etymology of the word humility is? It's great. I love it. It comes from humus, which is, if you go to like a gardening store and you ask for humus, they will give you a bag of really good dirt for planting your garden, right? And who do we know that was made from dirt? Adam, right? So when we think of humility, we think, I came from dirt and I'm going to go back to dirt. Right? So that's what humility is. Patience, right? Christ speaks very well of patience, right? And love, right? And then this last little addendum, right? Help me to see my own transgressions. Help me to see my own sins, my own flaws, my own screwed upness, and not to judge my brother. So that's hard. That's a hard one, right? So it's really a beautiful prayer. I mean, it's just super robust. Yeah. So, um, so this effort here on the fourth from the bottom line here. This effort is aimed first at our liberation from some fundamental spiritual diseases which shape our life and make it virtually impossible for us even to start turning ourselves to God. And those are, as we said before, sloth, despair, or vain curiosity, lust for power and idle talk. These four are thus the objects of repentance. They are the obstacles to be removed, but God alone can remove them. Hence, the first part of the Lenten prayer, this cry from the bottom of human helplessness. Then the prayer moves to the positive aims of repentance, which also are four: chastity, humility, patience, and love. All this is summarized and brought together in the concluding petition of the Lenten prayer, in which we ask to see my own failings and not condemn my brother. For ultimately, there is but one danger: pride. Right? That's what destroyed the devil, and really, in some sense, that's what's destroyed Adam and Eve. Right? Eve didn't think; she thought, I know better than God. Right? Well, the devil said, the serpent said, did God really tell you that you can't eat this? Right? So pride is probably the most damaging. There's a great story. There's a great little anecdote in the sayings of the Desert Fathers from St. Anthony the Great. And it says, like, at some point, St. Anthony had a vision of like the heavens and like the spiritual realm. And he saw all these nets in the sky, like catching people as they were like ascending up to heaven. And he said, what can get through all of these nets? And he heard a voice that said, humility. Right? So it's humility. Pride is the source of evil, and all evil is pride. Yet it is not enough for me to see my own failings, for even this apparent virtue can be turned into pride. Right? I can say, hey, look at me. Look at me. Look at how great I confessed all my sins. I'm awesome. I'm going to be a saint, right? Spiritual writings are full of warnings against the subtle forms of pseudo-piety, which in reality, under the cover of humility and self-accusation, can lead to a truly demonic pride, right? So oftentimes we can become just deluded. You see this in the lives of the saints and in the writings of the fathers. But when we see our own failings and do not condemn our brothers, when, in other terms, chastity, humble-mindedness, patience, and love are but one in us, then and only then the ultimate enemy, pride, will be destroyed in us. Any comments? It's 8:00, and I like to honor my time constraints. I will say this: if anyone didn't get those talks on Rome, I'm happy to give them to you. Just let me know. Maybe grab me after this talk, and I can send them to you, or text or email to you, because they are worth listening to. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, Jason. His name is Father Maximus Constis. He's actually American. He grew up in New York. He studied at our seminary in Brookline, Holy Cross. I think he got a PhD at like maybe Catholic University, maybe. And he actually taught at Harvard. And he's brilliant. He's really a brilliant guy. And he has a lot of talks. I actually have like 30 of his talks. And actually right now I'm in the middle of listening to one of his talks on the life of St. Basil the Great. But yeah, he's very good. I mean, he just knows his stuff. Like Father Maximus Constis. Yeah, if you put that in YouTube, you can actually find talks by him.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's every year, first week of Lent, I always listen to the Life of Saint Mary of Egypt. I feel like it's obligatory. Yeah, I think it was 2 days ago I listened to it. I had a long commute somewhere and I was listening. It's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
Question that you. Why do we not have oath second? Why do we jump from oath first to oath?
Yeah, that's a guy with a PhD type question, not a Father Panteleimon who knows a little bit of a lot, but not a lot of anything. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Who do I know? Who you should ask actually. I'd ask Elias Pagonis. He might know that. Yeah, because he's more musically knowledgeable. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, good to see you all. As always, let's close with a prayer. And if anyone can stay and help kind of pack all this up, I would be thankful. Lord of the powers, be with us, for in times of distress, we have no other help but you. Lord of the powers, have mercy on us. Amen. All right. Goodbye, Zoom people.
I'll gather the report.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let me see. How do I get off of this? Oh, there we go. Kill that. Doot.
Did you mail me